Hello everyone, it's Joe here from Snake Draft FPL. We're back with another video. Today we're looking at some underrated draft picks for Draft FPL 24-25 season. Let's get stuck into it. So I've picked out 4 players today that I think are very good draft picks, and I think are just going a little bit underrated in a lot of people's rankings and kind of decision making process when they're having a look at their upcoming drafts. So I just thought I'd highlight each of them. What I've done is I've compared them with some players that have been drafted in a similar sort of position or maybe slightly ahead of them, and not necessarily saying they're better picks, but just that you might be able to get them around later than the sort of comparable picks and get a little bit of extra value out of your draft. So if you enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. We've got loads more content than just the videos. If you check out the Patreon in the link down below, loads of helpful stuff going on in the pre-season. We've got player profiles, rankings, predicted lineups, all that sort of stuff. So let's get into the first one. First up then, as you can see, is Dominic Solanke, and I've had a look at his season-long data from last season and compared him to the two sort of biggest hype forwards behind Haaland, which are Watkins and Isak. Now, I'm definitely not saying that Solanke is a better pick than the other two or even as good, but I do think that a lot of people have said to me, why would you pick one of the top mids if you can guarantee Watkins or Isak and take that forward slot? And one of the reasons is that I do think there are a couple of things about Watkins and Isak that are being overlooked a little bit. And someone like Dominic Solanke, if you can pick them up a round or even 2 rounds later, could prove excellent value. So this is the season-long data. Solanke and Watkins were fit for the whole season. Solanke played every game. Watkins played 37. Isak did have a few couple of minor injuries, which he is prone to do. So I think it is fair to use the full season data, because I would expect from the start of the season, if I had to guess, I would think that 38 starts for Solanke, 38 appearances for Solanke, 37 for Watkins and 30 for Isak across this whole season coming up is probably realistic, just because of Isak's injury history. So I do think that's pretty fair. Over the course of the season, Solanke and Watkins both 19 goals, Isak 21, and that was from an XG of 19.64 for Solanke, 20.22 for Isak and 16.74 for Watkins. So Solanke and Isak pretty much performed bang on their XG. Watkins was a bit of an overperformer, and I think that's a bit of a trend that we'll see in this video. I don't think it's crazy that Watkins would overperform his XG again, but I think we're more likely than not to see a little bit of regression, so he will need to up that number. And considering he doesn't have penalties and he's got a whole season worth of data here, Villa, I don't think are going to get considerably better this season than they were last season. I think they might improve a bit, but it feels like at the moment sort of top 4 is their ceiling. So is Watkins going to get a considerably more XG than he did last year? I think it's unlikely. He could get up to that sort of 20 mark, but I'm not predicting much more than that. If he does continue to overperform and his XG goes up by 2 or 3, then we could see a really good season from him, but I'm not expecting massive improvement in that regard. Isak performed really well. We could see some improvement there, especially if he stays fit for the entire season. And when it comes to Solanke, I just don't really see any reason why his data would go down unless he gets some kind of injury this season. Bournemouth are a good team. They're settled. No new manager, no new system. They've not had any major players they've lost apart from Lloyd Kelly, but that shouldn't make too much difference. So I'm just expecting the same again really from Solanke. I'm expecting the same again from all 3 of these, to be honest, in terms of the underlying data at least. When we look at the assists figure, the XA for these 3, 2.11, 4.02, 2.68 from the 3 of them. So not much different. Watkins is higher than the other 2, but not by a massive amount. I would expect, looking at these numbers, that you'd see maybe 2 or 3 more assists for Watkins. As we'll see here, Solanke 3 assists, Isak 4 assists, Watkins 18 assists. 18 assists from 4 expected assists is mad. I know he did win a lot of penalties and free kicks that ended up getting converted, and that is something, because he doesn't have penalties and Solanke and Isak do, he is more likely to pick up those assists. Obviously Solanke's not going to pick up assists for winning penalties because he's taking the penalties, so he won't get any assist points for that. So that is something to consider, that Watkins will get a few more assists because he doesn't take the penalties, but he's not getting the goals for the penalties, so it's not really much of a benefit. I'd be astonished if he gets double-digit assists this season. 18, the amount of assists he got from like rolling passes back to Douglas Luiz, who put one in from 25 yards, is quite incredible. And when we look at the expected points, Solanke actually tops it for the three of them. Expected points of 178, Watkins 170, Isak 167. So Watkins to get 228 points from 170 X points is mad. It is a massive overperformance, and I'm not saying it's not impossible that he doesn't do something similar. I'm just saying that statistically it's very unlikely, and I know he's a good player. I know people will say, oh well, some people do overperform. Some people do, but to that extent I just don't see it. So I do think there'll be some regression there, and I just think Solanke's not much worse of a pick than the other two. I know he plays for a worse team, but he's more of a focal point in that team than the other two, and I think he's just been a little bit overlooked compared to the massive amounts of hype that's going around for Watkins and Isak. Next up, we've got Eberechi Eze, and I've looked at him compared to Gordon, Bowen and Maddison. I feel like the four of these are all being drafted in the similar sort of position, third round, in a 10-man league sort of area. I've done the data on this by per 90 minutes over the course of last season, just because Eze did miss a significant period at the start of the season through injury. So I just wanted, and so as did Maddison as well in the mid part. So I just wanted the data to be kind of even across the four of them. And you can see from this table that Eze's data is significantly better than all of the other three, basically. The underlying metrics, the two that I look at more than anything, XG and XA, and a kind of culmination of that is expected points, and Eze is ahead on both, especially the XG metric. 0.4 expected goals per 90 is very strong. That's higher than Gordon, higher than Bowen, higher than Maddison, and he did actually deliver on that with 0.48 goals per 90 last season, which is really good. I often kind of do think of Eze as someone that is a little bit profligate and underperforms, but the data kind of proves me wrong here. He got the same goals per 90 that Bowen did, and Bowen overperformed more based on the expected data. Eze also is very creative. I think having Mateta kind of settled as the number one forward for Palace really helps him. Actually having a striker that can score goals kind of does make a big difference to the assist numbers. Gordon, 0.5 assists from 0.17 XA is almost all down to his unbelievable ability to win penalties. I wouldn't be surprised if that does continue into the new season, that kind of overperformance there, because Gordon is probably the best penalty winner in the entire league. Maybe one of the best we've ever seen, actually, because he doesn't dive, but he's incredibly good at luring defenders into making that contact. So I wouldn't be surprised if that does continue, so that is definitely a bonus for Gordon. And I'm not saying that Eze's a better pick than these three, I'm just saying he's definitely within a shout of all of them, and I wouldn't personally be put off if I could get Eze a round later than Gordon. I think that's a bit of a win. He has had some injury issues and did miss a few games last season, and that is a bit of a concern. So that is definitely something to consider. But the data kind of speaks for itself, really. He tops basically every single metric on this chart. And he's also on penalties, which is a massive bonus. I think Bowen probably on penalties for West Ham as well, but Gordon and Maddison are not. And that is a massive bonus when it comes to just season-long projections. So I'm a big fan of Eze, and he's someone that I'll definitely be looking to pick up. Next up, we've got Heung-Min Son. Often probably not someone that I think is underrated, and I think in a general football sense I wouldn't say he's underrated, but this year specifically there's so much hype, including myself, if you've watched my most recent video about Foden and Palmer, and it was actually when I was making that video that this kind of occurred to me, that maybe I'm overlooking Son a little bit. When we look at the data, I've gone for non-penalty expected goals in this one. Son and Palmer both do take penalties, so that shouldn't cloud things too much. Palmer had, I think, 9 penalties last season. I think Son had 2, maybe. So that does cloud the goals and expected goals tally. So I've gone for non-penalty XG in this one. All 3 of them played very similar amount of minutes. So there's not really a factor there. When we look at the open play goal data, it's very close between the 3 of them. I was actually surprised that Son was slightly lower than the other 2. I expected his to be the highest of the 3, but it is very close between the 3 of them. There's almost nothing in it. 9.87 versus 10.17 plus is 10.1. It's basically negligible over the course of a season. From that, 17 goals from Son, 19 for Foden, 22 for Palmer. But remember, Palmer with 9 penalties really does put a bit of a sheen on that tally. And the assists is a similar story. 7.87 expected assists for Son, only 6.95 for Foden, which is lower than I would have expected. He is actually the lowest of the 3 of these, despite I think a lot of people see him as a very creative player, but in actual fact he doesn't create nearly as many chances as you think. He is more of a shot output kind of player. And from that, 10 assists for Son, 8 for Foden, 13 for Palmer. So Palmer did really well from the assist potential that he got. I think part of that is due to his very strong decision making, and part of that is probably just a little bit of variance. And that all culminates in the expected points of Son and Foden being almost identical, and Palmer being about 20 points higher of 190 with Son and Foden on 168. And that doesn't surprise me because of the penalties. If you take out those penalties, I think he had 6 or 7 more penalties than Son. You're looking at probably 7 points per penalty. That then puts him at the bottom of the 3 as opposed to the top. So it's interesting. It's really interesting that Foden and Palmer's stock is so high, whereas Son's kind of, there's not. People aren't excited about drafting him this year, and I get it. He is a little bit older. I think Foden and Palmer are both going to improve year on year, whereas Son is probably at his level now. So maybe, if we're looking at projecting forward, Foden and Palmer definitely do have scope to improve these numbers. And Son, you would expect to probably, I'd be surprised if he didn't score between sort of 16 and 20 goals and got like 8 to 12 assists. So you're thinking low 200 points for Son, whereas Foden and Palmer could go on beyond that, and they both did last season. But as we can see from the expected point data, they both did overperform quite considerably last season, and there aren't that many players that go sort of 220 points plus year on year. So just something to be aware of. I think all 3 of these I think are really good picks, but I don't think there's that much in it, to be honest. And next up, finally, we've got Luis Diaz, someone that I wasn't really. I find him really difficult to rank, but the more I've looked into it, the more I think he is the only real winger of the options that Liverpool have that is an out-and-out winger, will be happy to hug the line and sort of make things happen from a wide area. And Liverpool, I think Slot will want one of his wingers to do that. So I do think Diaz is in, when they're all fit and available, I think Diaz is probably going to end up being first choice on the left. I'm not convinced that Slot will want to go with 3 forwards that all like to raid the box, because he does like to have that from central areas from deep, which Klopp never used to do. The central midfielders for Liverpool always stayed pretty much on the edge of the box. That's not really how it's going to be. So you do need that width, from your wingers. And Salah can cut in and Trent can overlap, but on the left, the overlapping options, Robertson, we've seen a little bit of decline over the last couple of years, so I think he will want Luis Diaz to stay wide, and I think he does that much better than Jota or Darwin or Gakpo from the left. So I think the minutes are definitely questionable, but I would expect similar to last year. 2,600 minutes I don't think is unrealistic. for Luis Diaz. That's why I've left this data as full season data, not per 90, because I think these minutes from Diaz, Odegaard, Bruno and Gordon are realistic to continue. Obviously there will be reduced minutes for Diaz compared to the others. The other three will play almost every single game. So I think it's fair to compare the season long data, and when we look at it, the XG is, it's miles ahead of the other three. 12.08 versus 7.53, 9.73 and 10 for Gordon, 7.5 for Odegaard and 9.7 for Bruno. But an XG of 12 over the course of the season is really high. Considering he didn't take any penalties, that's actually, if we go back, that's actually higher than Son, Foden and Palmer, which is quite surprising. The fact that he only scored 8 goals from that 12 XG, you could say maybe he's not a good finisher, but we've seen in the past that he has performed to his XG. So is it just variance? That is definitely something to look at. But I think from this data you can glean that there is definitely the potential for Luis Diaz to have a very, very strong season. And especially when you think about the other three, Odegaard, Bruno Fernandes and Gordon, all three of them took at least one penalty last season. I think Gordon took 1, Odegaard took 1 or maybe 2, and Bruno I think took 5. And that data is bundled into their XG. So from open play, Luis Diaz is absolutely blowing these three out of the water. And okay, there might be some regression from Liverpool, but even with that, I still think he's definitely going under the radar. Expected assist data, okay, Odegaard and Bruno are chance creation monsters, so I'd expect to see theirs a lot higher. Gordon 5.4, Luis Diaz 4.7, that's pretty close, but as I said earlier, Gordon does win a lot of penalties. So he's definitely more of a goal threat than an assist threat, but that could change depending on how Slot plays him. If he is going to stay a little bit wider, maybe that sort of XG to XA tilts a little bit further towards chance creation. And when we add that all together into the expected points, he's actually right up there with all 4 of them, ahead of Gordon, ahead of Bruno Fernandes, and just behind Odegaard. Odegaard 167, Diaz 164, Bruno 161, Gordon 143. He just didn't capitalise on that data last season, only 142 points, the only one of these to underperform, and he did underperform by quite a margin. Now I would expect Odegaard, Bruno and Gordon all to get in the 180 to 200 points mark next season. That's, I think, their sort of benchmark. I think Luis Diaz has the potential to blow that out the water. I don't think he will, probably. I think he will be in that group with these three. And this is another one where I'm saying I don't necessarily think he's a better pick than the other three, but I think he's definitely in this group. And yeah, I think I'm going to have to reshuffle my rankings after this video, because it actually trawling through the data did surprise me with some of this. So I'm definitely going to take note of this. And if we see, he has been away in pre-season, Luis Diaz, so we haven't seen much of him in pre-season. But once they're all back fit and training and playing pre-season matches, I'm definitely going to keep a close eye on him. Okay then everyone, that wraps up this video, so thank you all for watching. If you enjoy, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, check out the Patreon down below, and we'll see you next time.